Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we travel to a land of ancient, balancing rocks and weathered granite hills. We're going to the country of Zimbabwe, where the earth itself seems to have shoulders. Where great boulders perch in impossible stillness, as if placed by a giant's careful hand. In this land of stone, a particular kind of conversation has been happening for over 1,000 years. It is a conversation held not in words, but in silence. A dialogue between human hands and the memory of the rock. In these quiet, majestic spaces, we meet the Shona sculptors. But do not call them mere artists. That word suggests someone who imposes a vision upon a passive material. These masters understood something deeper. They knew that stone is not inert. It holds memory, the memory of volcanic fire, of slow cooling, of continental shifts that tore and reshaped the world. They believe that within its crystalline heart, forms are sleeping. The sculptor's role is not to create, but to listen, to hear what the rock has always wanted to become, and then, with infinite patience and respect, to help it remember. This philosophy is at the core of their tradition. It transforms the act of creation from a display of human ego into an act of humble service. The carver becomes a midwife, assisting in a birth that was preordained by the geology of the earth itself. They see the lines of potential, the hidden curves, the spirit of an animal or an ancestor already present within the block of serpentine or springstone. The hammer and chisel are not tools of conquest. They are instruments of revelation, used to peel back the layers of time and reveal a truth that was always there, waiting. This is the gentle art of revelation. Over the next while, we will sit in quiet quarry meditation, learning to hear a stone's intent. Imagine the scene. A sculptor sits for days, sometimes weeks, beside a raw block of stone. He walks around it, touches its surface, feels its weight and temperature. He is not planning his attack. He is waiting for the stone to speak to him, to show him its soul. It's a process that defies the modern world's obsession with speed and efficiency. It is slow, deliberate, and deeply spiritual. We will handle the tools that whisper wooden mallets and soft copper chisels that coax rather than force. Unlike the loud, aggressive tools of industrial stonework, these instruments are designed for a more intimate conversation. Each tap is a question, each shaving of stone a response. The sound is not a crash, but a soft rhythm, a heartbeat that synchronizes the carver with the material. We will also journey back in time to contemplate the mysterious, unfinished soapstone birds of Great Zimbabwe. These iconic sculptures, perched atop the ancient city's walls, are powerful symbols of the nation. But look closely, and you'll see they aren't polished to perfection. This wasn't a lack of skill. To the ancient Shona, leaving a piece slightly unfinished was a profound spiritual statement. It acknowledged that only the divine can achieve true perfection. To complete a work entirely was to trap its spirit, to build a spiritual cage. The slight roughness, the unfinished detail, was a doorway for the spirit to remain free. Then we'll return to the present and feel the modern dilemma of a carver torn between two worlds. We'll meet a young sculptor, heir to this incredible legacy. In one hand, he holds the tools of his grandfather, and in his heart, he feels the silent call of his grandfather's unfinished masterpiece, a stone that has been waiting for generations. But in his other hand, he holds a phone ringing with the shouting demands of the international art market. Tourists want small, easily transportable souvenirs. Galleries want what's trendy. The pressure to produce quickly, to compromise, to forget the slow art of listening is immense. It's a struggle between soul and survival, between a sacred tradition and the noisy, impatient demands of commerce. This is a story about patience. It's a story about relationship. It asks us to reconsider what it means to make something. Is it an act of will or an act of discovery? Is it a shout or a listener for whisper? So, as we begin, I invite you to find a comfortable space. Let the solid, quiet presence of the stone around you become a felt thing. Breathe slowly. Let your own thoughts settle like dust, and prepare to enter a world where the greatest skill was not in the cutting, but in the listening that happened before the first chip of stone ever fell. You are now under baobab skies, before a Shona master carver even thinks about picking up a tool. Their work has already begun. It doesn't start with a hammer and chisel, but with a quiet, profound act of presence. It's a ritual of introduction, a way of acknowledging that the stone isn't just a raw material to be used. It's a living participant, a keeper of ancient stories, and it must be approached with respect. The master carver's name was Tao. In the Shona language, this means lion. But as he walked through the soft, grey light of dawn, his movements were gentle, almost silent. He wasn't a predator stalking its prey. He was a pilgrim approaching a sacred site. The place he was heading towards was a massive granite outcrop, known to his people as Dombo Remweri, the Rock of God. This wasn't a quarry in the way we might imagine, with machines and explosions. It was a place of relationship, a place where generations of carvers had come not just to take, but to listen. The granite here was unique, a beautiful tapestry of grey, speckled with dark, glossy hornblende and tiny flashes of mica that caught the first rays of the sun like trapped stars. When struck, it had a special resonance, a deep, musical quality that other stones lacked. As Tao approached, you would notice something strange. He carried no tools. His hands were empty. All he had was a small, dried gourd filled with water and a simple leather pouch containing a handful of white millet. He reached the base of the great stone face, its surface still cool from the night air, and he stopped. He didn't rush to touch it or inspect it for flaws. He just stood there, his breath making soft, white clouds in the chill of the morning. And he looked. He wasn't sizing it up, calculating its volume, or planning his cuts. He was simply being present. He was letting the stone see him, letting his presence be known in the quiet landscape. After a long while, a period of stillness that could stretch for minutes or an hour, he knelt down. With slow, deliberate movements, he opened the gourd and poured a little water onto the earth at the base of the rock. It was a libation, an offering of life-giving liquid to the spirit of the place. Then he took the millet from his pouch and scattered the small, white grains in a gentle arc. It was an offering of sustenance, of grain from the earth returning to the earth. And then he spoke, his voice so soft it was almost part of the morning silence. "Grandfather Stone," he murmured, "I am Tao, son of Chengatai, of the Nayati clan. I come with empty hands and a listening heart. I ask permission to visit. I ask to hear your story." This was the first, and perhaps most crucial, step in the entire process. The introduction. In his culture, the stone was seen as an elder, a being that had witnessed the passing of ages, a keeper of deep time. You didn't just show up and start hacking away at an elder. You announced yourself respectfully. You stated your lineage, your name, your father's name, your clan. This wasn't just a formality. It was so the stone knew who was asking, so it could place you within the web of life. You made an offering, a fundamental exchange of energy, water and grain, for the possibility of being granted a piece of its ancient self. It was a transaction rooted in humility, not entitlement. Only after this ritual of introduction was complete did Tao finally place his hands upon the stone. But even then, his touch was not one of assessment. His palms, calloused and lined from a lifetime of work, didn't probe for weaknesses or test for hardness. They lay flat against the rough, cooling surface, making full contact. He closed his eyes. He wasn't feeling for shape or texture. He was feeling for something far more subtle, something an outsider might not even believe was there. He was feeling for presence, for the stone's energy, its spirit. To Tao, each rock had its own state of being. Some felt sleepy, dormant, content to remain part of the mountain for another 1,000 years. They had no story they wished to tell, no form they wished to take. They radiated a quiet stillness, a deep sense of peace. To try and carve such a stone would be a violation. It would be like trying to wake someone from a deep and peaceful sleep just for your own purposes. The result would be a dead thing, a sculpture with no life, no soul. But other rocks felt different. They felt restless. They hummed with a kind of internal tension, a feeling that there was a form trapped inside, straining to be released. These were the stones that held a story ready to be told. Tao wasn't choosing a rock to carve. He was waiting for a rock to choose him. He was waiting for one to signal its readiness. He began to move slowly along the massive stone face. His hands became his eyes, his ears, his heart. They slid over the surface like blind readers exploring a vast page of braille made of granite, feldspar, and mica. This process could take days, even weeks. There was no hurry. The concept of time in the quarry was different. It wasn't measured in hours and minutes, but in sunrises, moon cycles, and the slow, patient rhythm of listening. The right stone would declare itself in its own time. How did it signal him? It was never obvious. It might be a subtle difference in temperature, a patch of rock that felt warmer to the touch, as if it held the memory of yesterday's sun more intensely than the stone around it. Or it might be an almost imperceptible vibration, a faint hum that traveled through his palms only when the wind blew from a certain direction, as if the stone itself was singing a secret song. Sometimes, a small lizard might scurry across the rock face and stop at a particular spot, basking in the sun, as if pointing the way. To Tao, these were not coincidences. They were signs, messages from the stone. This entire process was a form of meditation. The quarry meditation. It was a deep, silent dialogue between the carver and the material. It was a courtship, a slow and patient dance where the first move was always left to the stone. The carver's role was not to impose his will, but to become a conduit. He was there to help the stone tell its own story, to release the form that was already sleeping within. His genius lay not in his ability to create something from nothing, but in his ability to see what was already there, waiting. And so Tao would continue his patient pilgrimage along the Rock of God, his hands tracing the ancient contours, his heart open and listening. He was waiting for that moment of connection, that spark of recognition when a piece of granite would say, "Here I am ready, my story is for you to tell." When that moment came, and only then, would he return to the village to gather his tools. The work of carving was about to begin, but the true work, the work of connection, of listening, and of respect, was already done. This approach teaches us a profound lesson, not just about art, but about our relationship with the world around us. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature, but a part of it, that the world is not just a collection of resources for us to use, but a community of living beings with which we can have a relationship. Each day at dawn, Tao returned to the granite outcrop. He carried with him only the essentials, a goatskin filled with fresh water and a small pouch of food for himself. Notably absent were any tools of his craft. There were no hammers, no chisels, no implements of shaping or breaking. His work at this stage was not one of action, but of deep, sensory diagnosis. He was, in a very real sense, reading the stone's body, learning its unique anatomy, understanding its history and its potential. His hands were his primary instruments. He would move them slowly, deliberately, over the vast, weathered face of the granite. You could see his fingertips tracing invisible lines, pressing firmly, then releasing. He was feeling for the density beneath the surface, the very soul of the rock. A uniform, solid resistance under his palms was a good sign. It spoke of a healthy, consistent body. But if he felt a spongy texture or a sudden give, it was an alert. This indicated a hidden flaw, a fracture deep within, or perhaps a pocket of softer, less reliable material. In his mind, this was the stone's illness, a vulnerability that needed to be either avoided completely or incorporated with extreme care and respect into the final design. Each press, each slide of his hand was a question, and the stone's response guided his understanding. But his diagnosis didn't stop with touch. He also listened. From a small leather pouch at his belt, he would take out a smooth, round riverstone worn by eons of flowing water. This was his tapping stone. He would tap gently in different spots across the outcrop, bringing his ear close to the surface, listening with an almost reverent concentration. The granite spoke back to him, not in words, but in tones. A clear, high-pitched ping was the sound of a solid, flawless, crystalline structure. This meant the stone was strong, but it also warned of potential brittleness. It might shatter under the wrong kind of pressure. A deep, dull thud, on the other hand, suggested a denser, more forgiving material, one that would absorb the shock of the chisel more readily. And then there was the sound he dreaded, a cracked, muffled thud. This was a clear warning. It signaled a hidden fault line, a weakness lurking beneath the surface, a betrayal waiting to manifest months into the painstaking work of carving. In his mind, Tao was mapping these sounds, building a complex, three-dimensional, sonic image of the stone's interior. He was creating a symphony of the unseen. Then there was the grain. Just as wood has a grain that dictates how it must be worked, so does stone. To reveal it, Tao would take a little water from his goatskin and wet a small patch of the rock. As the water darkened the surface, the intricate pattern of the crystals would become visible. This was the stone's fingerprint, unique and unrepeatable. Some granite had a long, flowing grain, almost like the lines in a piece of aged oak. This kind of stone, he knew, wanted to be carved along its length. It yearned to become something tall and graceful, like a standing figure or a slender column. Other stone had a tight, swirled grain, patterns that coiled in on themselves like a galaxy. This suggested a more contained form, a coiled animal, a powerful head, or a rounded, generous vessel. The grain was the stone's own desire, its inherent direction, and to ignore it would be to fight against its very nature. Tao was searching for the perfect confluence of all these factors. The ideal piece of stone was one where the internal sound was clear and solid, where the grain flowed in an interesting and cooperative pattern, and where the natural shape of the exposed rock already suggested a form. He would spend hours just looking, letting his imagination play over the surfaces. Perhaps this natural protrusion already looked like the beginning of a shoulder. Maybe that smooth, flat plane could become a face with minimal effort. That gentle curve could be the sweep of a back. The stone was already speaking in the language of shape. Tao was simply learning to translate. He wasn't imposing his will upon the rock. He was entering into a conversation with it, listening for the story it already wanted to tell. Let's just pause here for a moment and consider this. Think about the profound attention, the deep patience in this process. In our modern world, we so often value speed, efficiency, and force. We want to get things done quickly. Here was a man, Tao, spending weeks engaged in what, to an outside observer, would look like complete inactivity. He wasn't producing anything. He wasn't making any visible progress. but his mind was intensely active. He was building a relationship. He was learning a new language, the language of stone. He was, in a very real way, becoming friends with this immense piece of granite. He knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that to carve against the grain, or to ignore a hidden flaw, would be more than just a technical failure. It wouldn't just mean a ruined sculpture and wasted time. It would be a betrayal. A betrayal of the trust the stone was placing in him by revealing its innermost nature. This act of listening, this period of quiet observation, was an act of profound respect. It was the silent, invisible foundation upon which everything to come would be built. The final form, whatever it would be, wouldn't be something he forced upon the rock. It would be a co-creation, a partnership between the artist's vision and the stone's inherent spirit. This reminds us that the most important work is often the work that happens before the work. It's the preparation, the listening, the understanding. Whether you're an artist, an engineer, a writer, or a leader, this principle holds true. The time spent in diagnosis, in learning the anatomy of a problem or a material, is never wasted. It's the difference between forcing a solution and discovering one that was waiting to be revealed. Tao's method teaches us that true mastery isn't about overpowering the material. It's about understanding it so deeply that you become its partner. The hammer and chisel would have their time, but that time was not yet. First came the friendship. First came the trust. First came the listening. And in that silence, the sculpture was already beginning to take shape. 7 dawns had passed. 7 cycles of sun and moon, of watching light and shadow dance across the ancient rock face. The suggestion, when it finally came, wasn't a sudden shout, a flash of inspiration. No, it was quieter, more profound. It was a gradual crystallization, a deep, internal knowing that settled within him. It was the culmination of everything he had learned over those 7 days, every texture felt under his fingertips, every subtle shift in color his eyes had tracked. Every whisper of wind he had heard echoing from the stone. He found himself standing before a specific section of the outcrop, drawn there by an instinct he couldn't explain. It was a medium-sized boulder, one that had sheared away from the main cliff face countless millennia ago. It stood about as tall as a man, its shape a rough, weathered oval. It was unassuming, just one stone among thousands. Yet today, it felt different. It felt like an answer. As he placed his hands on its sun-warmed surface this morning, the knowing settled deep in his chest, solid and certain. He saw it, not with his physical eyes, but in that inner space of vision, the mind's eye. Within that weathered oval form, a mother and child were waiting. He could see them so clearly. The gentle, sweeping curve of the stone was the mother's protective back, bending over her precious child. A natural depression near the top, a hollow carved by time and weather, would become the intimate space between her bowed head and the child's. The very grain of the stone, the lines and patterns running through it, seemed to flow in a way that would guide his hands, guiding the carving of the 2 figures into a single, intertwined entity. It was a story of love and protection already written in the language of geology. This, he realized, was the stone's intent. It had held this form, this secret, since the day it cooled from the Earth's molten heart. It had been waiting. And his role, it wasn't to impose his will upon it, not to force a shape from lifeless rock. His role was to agree, to be the midwife who would help deliver this form from the realm of potential into the visible world. It was a partnership, a sacred trust. He felt a sense of profound humility and responsibility wash over him. The stone had chosen him, and he had finally learned how to listen. The time for observation was over. The period of quiet meditation had come to its natural end. Now, a new phase began. He reached into the small leather pouch at his side, his fingers brushing past smooth river stones and worn tools, searching for one specific item. His final tool for this initial stage, he pulled out a simple stick of charcoal, a remnant from last night's fire, its tip blackened and ready. He stood before the boulder, poised and utterly focused. The world around him seemed to fade, away the cry of a distant bird, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. All of it became a distant hum. There was only him, the stone, and the charcoal stick held lightly in his hand. He wasn't about to sketch a detailed outline, not like an artist preparing a canvas. This was something different, something more primal. He raised his hand, the charcoal hovering just above the stone's surface. Then, with a single, decisive movement, he began to draw. It was one continuous, flowing line. It started at the very top of the boulder, where the crown of the mother's head would be, and swept down in a long, gentle curve. The line defined the outer silhouette of the two figures together, a contour of unity, of inseparable connection. It wasn't a sketch, it was a gesture. It was an affirmation. This single charcoal line was sacred. It was the first word in a contract between man and stone. With that one mark, he was saying, "I have heard you. I see the form you hold within. This is the path we will walk together." It was a promise. This line was not a prison for the stone, not a rigid boundary it must conform to. Instead, it was a suggested direction, a path of least resistance based entirely on the stone's own shape, its own grain, its own history. The line respected the natural faults and fissures he had so carefully mapped with his hands and eyes. It flowed with the crystalline structure, not against it. It was a line of cooperation, not conquest. A deep sense of peace settled over him. The agreement was made. The pact was sealed. Only now, with the agreement marked in charcoal, could the next phase begin. The extraction. But even this would not be an act of brute force. He would not simply hack the boulder free from its earthly anchor. This, too, had to be a collaborative act, a continuation of the dialogue he had started. He retrieved his other tools, sturdy stone wedges, sharpened to a fine point, and a heavy wooden maul, crafted from the heart of a hardwood tree. He knelt at the base of the boulder, examining the natural fracture lines he had identified earlier. These were the stone's own suggestions for where it was willing to separate. He would work along these planes, not against them. He carefully placed the first stone wedge into a narrow crack. Then, with the heavy maul, he began to tap. Not with violent, shattering blows, but with rhythmic, persuasive strikes. Each tap sent a vibration through the stone, a percussive question. He was asking the stone to separate from the earth, inviting it to come free along the planes it had already formed ages ago. It was a slow, deliberate process. Tap, tap, listen. Adjust the wedge. Tap, tap, feel the vibration. He was in conversation with the rock, speaking in a language of pressure and release. His goal was to remove the piece with minimal violence, to ensure its spirit, its inherent form, remained intact and undisturbed. He needed the stone to come willingly, ready for the long, whispering dialogue of the mallet and chisel that was to come. This initial separation was crucial. If done with disrespect, with too much force, the stone might fracture in an unexpected way. Its inner story shattered before it could be told. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting his shadow long behind him. Sweat beaded on his brow, but his focus never wavered. He was a part of the landscape, a figure of intense concentration, his movements economical and precise. He was no longer just an observer. He was an active participant in the stone's journey. With a final, resonant thud, there was a deep, groaning sound from within the earth. A new crack appeared, and the great boulder shifted, leaning forward just slightly. It was ready. It had agreed. The separation was clean, just as he had hoped, following the natural fault line perfectly. The boulder was now free, resting on the earth, a separate entity, yet still pulsing with the energy of the mountain it came from. He stood back, breathing deeply, a sense of profound accomplishment washing over him. The meditation was over. The long days of silent watching and listening were done. The real conversation, the intimate, year-long dialogue of shaping and revealing, had just begun. This colossal stone, filled with silent potential, was now his partner. Together, they would bring the mother and child into the light. The great boulder, finally separated from the earth that held it for millennia, began its journey. It was a slow, deliberate procession. The stone carried on a sturdy ox cart, groaning under the immense weight. The destination was Tao's Dare, his sacred workspace. This wasn't a formal studio with 4 walls and a roof, but an open-air workshop nestled under the sprawling, generous shade of a massive MSRSA tree. Here, the air hummed with a quiet energy. The ground was littered with other stones, a family of rock in various stages of becoming. Some were just beginning to show hints of form. Others were nearly complete, their polished surfaces catching the dappled sunlight. This was where the real work, the deep alchemy of turning stone into story, would unfold. But before the first flake of granite could be removed, before the first line of the new form could be etched, there was the matter of the tools. For a Shona, master carver like Tao, these were not mere instruments or implements of a trade. They were far more. They were translators, extensions of his very spirit, conduits for his intent. They were designed for a dialogue with the stone, not for domination. They were partners in a delicate negotiation, not weapons of conquest. In this world, the tool did not conquer the material. It coaxed the spirit out of it. Let's look at Tao's mallet. One might expect something of iron or even another, harder stone, a tool designed for maximum impact. But Tao's was different. It was carved from a single, solid block of makwa wood. Makwa is a remarkable material, a hardwood so dense and heavy that a piece of it will sink in water. The mallet felt substantial in the hand, its weight a promise of power, but its voice was gentle. When it struck a chisel, it did not produce the sharp, ringing clang of metal on metal. There was no jarring shock that traveled up the arm. Instead, it made a deep, muffled thump, a sound like a steady heartbeat, resonant and earthy. The energy it transferred was unique. It was broad and compressive, spreading through the granite's crystalline structure rather than concentrating in a sharp, fracturing blow. You could think of it as a persuasive push, a firm suggestion rather than a shocking smash. It was the sound of respect. And then there were his chisels, the true marvels of his toolkit. In a modern workshop, you would find carbon steel, tungsten carbide tips, tools engineered for hardness and aggression. Tao's chisels were made of pure copper. They were beaten and work-hardened at their edges, but even so, they remained vastly softer than the granite they were meant to shape. This seems like a paradox, doesn't it? How can a softer material shape a harder one? A modern steel chisel bites hard into the stone. It's an aggressive act that risks creating microfractures, sending cracks deep into the material, threatening uncontrolled breaks along a hidden fault line you can't even see. The copper chisel operated on a completely different principle. It was a tool of patience, not of force. It would not, and could not, cut the stone in the way a knife cuts wood. Instead, it would crush the microscopic crystals of quartz and feldspar right at its point of contact. It was a process of abrasion, wearing the stone away grain by tiny, almost invisible grain. It was like a river eroding its banks, a slow, relentless persuasion. This gentle approach had a consequence built into its rhythm. The soft copper edge would blunt quickly, losing its effectiveness. This demanded constant resharpening on a smooth river stone that Tao kept nearby. It was a rhythmic pause, a moment of reflection built directly into the creative process, a constant reminder of the gentle, yielding nature of the work. With the boulder settled in its new home and the tools laid out with care, the moment arrived. Before the first strike, Tao performed a small, personal ritual. It was a practice of centering, of alignment. He held the heavy makwa mallet in his right hand, the copper chisel in his left. He walked to the stone, his bare feet feeling the cool, dusty earth. He touched the copper tip to a charcoal line he had drawn earlier, a faint map of his intention on the stone's weathered skin. Then he closed his eyes. In that moment of stillness, he wasn't just a man standing before a rock. He was aligning his breath, his heartbeat, his very being with the imagined form he sensed sleeping within the granite. It was a moment of profound connection, a silent promise to the stone. The first contact was not a strike. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was a placement. He set the chisel firmly on the charcoal mark, feeling its slight purchase on the rough surface. He took a deep, slow breath, and then, with an economy of motion, brought the makwa mallet down in a smooth, controlled, and utterly deliberate arc. Thump. The sound was soft, yet definitive. It didn't echo or shatter the silence of the dare, it became part of it. A tiny, almost insignificant puff of grey dust bloomed where the copper met the granite. It wasn't a chip or a shard, it was powder. Fine as flour, this was the wooden handshake, the first physical word in a long and intimate conversation. The sound, the dust, the feeling it, all said, "I am here. We begin." It was a greeting that acknowledged the stone's immense age and hardness, and simultaneously declared the carver's profound respect. The force was just sufficient to start the work, to initiate the transformation, but gentle enough not to alarm the material. It was calculated to avoid triggering a defensive shatter along some unseen, ancient fault line within the rock. From this first, mindful impact, a rhythm would be born. It would be a slow, patient language spoken between man and stone. A language of tap and pause, of cut and feel, of abrasion and rest. Each thump of the mallet, a syllable, each cloud of dust, a whispered word. Tao wasn't just removing material. He was listening. With every tap, he felt the vibration through the chisel, reading the stone's response. Was it willing? Was there resistance? Was there a flaw hidden just beneath the surface? The chisel was his ear, the mallet his voice. The process would be slow, painstakingly so. Hours would turn into days, days into weeks. The sun would track across the sky, its light filtering through the mzasa leaves, painting shifting patterns on the stone's surface. The rhythm would become a meditation. The thump of the mallet, the scrape of the chisel, the hiss of the sharpening stone, the soft whisper of Tao's breath. It was a dance of persistence and patience. He was not imposing his will upon the stone, but collaborating with it, discovering the form that the stone itself wanted to reveal. This first touch, this gentle, respectful greeting, set the tone for the entire journey. It was a partnership founded on understanding, not force, a dialogue that would slowly, carefully, lovingly bring a spirit out of the stone and into the light. The work that followed was the complete opposite of speed. Tao would work for maybe 4 hours in the cool of the morning, then take a long rest during the intense heat of the day. In the late afternoon, as the air began to cool again, he might work for another 2 hours. Each day, the pile of fine, silvery granite dust at the base of the stone grew by perhaps a cup's worth. That was it. Progress wasn't measured in inches or even centimeters. It was measured in millimeters. It was a timescale that perfectly matched the stone's own historygeological patience, applied directly to art. This wasn't about rushing to a finish line. It was about honoring the millions of years the stone had already existed. The rhythm of the work became everything. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, pause. This wasn't just a repetitive action, it was a conversation. And that pause, that moment of silence, was just as important as the tap of the mallet. In that quiet space, Tao's fingers would gently trace the new surface left by the blows. He was asking questions. Had the stone responded evenly? Was there a subtle change in resistance under his touch? Did this newly revealed plane feel right in relation to the form he was slowly coaxing out? The stone was talking back, not with words, but through its texture, its density, its very essence. Every slight variation was a piece of information, a whisper from the deep past. He wasn't fighting the stone. He was working with its internal structure. Granite isn't a single, uniform substance. It's an aggregate, a community of different minerals, all locked together. Quartz, feldspar, mica. Each of these has a slightly different hardness, a different personality. The soft copper chisel, which might seem too weak for such a hard stone, was the perfect tool for this delicate negotiation. It would find the weaker bonds between these crystals and gently, almost like a key in a lock, unzip them along their natural planes. It was a process of liberation. He was following the paths of least resistance that the stone itself provided. He wasn't forcing a shape onto an unwilling material. He was a guide, helping the stone shed what was unnecessary to finally reveal the beautiful figure it had always contained within. Imagine him there, under the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves of the msasa tree. His face is a mask of serene, absolute concentration. One hand holds the copper chisel steady against the granite, feeling the stone's pulse. The other brings the wooden mallet down, not with force, but with a precise, almost blurred motion born of endless practice. The emerging form of the mother and child is slowly taking shape. Bathed in the warm African light, it's a scene of creation, but a quiet, respectful one. Weeks slowly bled into months. The seasons began to shift. The original oval boulder, once just a large, anonymous rock, started to change in a fundamental way. That sweeping charcoal line he had drawn so long ago was no longer just a guide. It was now a hard, defined edge. The silhouette of the mother and her child was emerging from the solid mass of stone, like a new continent slowly rising from a vast, silent sea. It was a powerful, primal transformation. And as the larger form took shape, the smaller details began to whisper themselves into existence. Artistic creation is often a series of happy accidents and discoveries, and this was no exception. He encountered a patch of stone that was harder than the rest, unusually rich in quartz. It resisted the chisel just a little more, pushing back with its own strength. Instead of fighting it, Tao listened. This stubborn patch became the smooth, perfect curve of the mother's cheek. It demanded to be left prominent to catch the light in a special way. Further down, he discovered a thin, dark vein of hornblende running through the granite. It traced the exact line where the child's back would meet the mother's protective arm. It was a gift from the stone, a line drawn by nature millions of years ago, and Tao gratefully incorporated it into his design. It was a moment of pure collaboration, a perfect harmony between artist and material. Let's just pause here for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine you are there, under that msasa tree. The air is warm, filled with the scent of dry earth and leaves. The only sound is that ancient, hypnotic rhythm. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. It's a sound of profound, unwavering attention. There is no aggression in this sound, No violence of a tool against a resistant object. There is only collaboration. It's a partnership. The sculpture isn't being made in the way we might build something from scratch. It is being remembered. It's as if the form was always there, and Tao is just patiently uncovering it. Each tiny grain of dust that falls to the ground is like a forgotten word being released, a syllable of a long story finally being spoken. The form emerges not because Tao imagines it fiercely and imposes his will upon the rock. It emerges because he listens with an almost impossible intensity to the subtle suggestions the stone offers with every single blow, with every new surface that is revealed. It is a slow, graceful dance where the stone leads, and the carver follows with exquisite sensitivity and respect. He is not the master. He is the interpreter, translating the stone's silent language into a form we can all understand. As more time passed, the community around him began to take notice in a new way. At first, his project had been a curiosity, the old man tapping away at a rock. But now, as the figures became more distinct, a sense of awe began to grow. People would stop on their way to the fields or the market, not to talk to him, but just to stand and watch for a few moments. They didn't interrupt. They understood that something sacred was happening. The sound of his work, that steady tapping, became a part of the village's daily soundscape, as familiar as the cry of a fish eagle or the laughter of children playing. The sculpture began to take on a life of its own, even before it was finished. It became a landmark, a point of reference. Meet me by the stone mother, someone might say. The piece was already weaving itself into the fabric of their lives. It represented something enduring, something patient in a world that was often fast-paced and unpredictable. It was a testament to the idea that true value, true beauty, takes time. It cannot be rushed. Tao, for his part, remained completely absorbed. He was in a world of his own, a world populated by the texture of granite, the angle of light, and the feel of the emerging form under his fingertips. He wasn't creating an object. He was nurturing a relationship. The stone was his partner, his teacher, and his muse all at once. Every day, it taught him something new about patience, about listening, and about the hidden beauty that lies just beneath the surface of things. The process had transformed him as much as it had transformed the boulder. He was discovering that the act of creating was not about leaving his own mark on the world, but about revealing something that was already there. He was a conduit, a channel through which the spirit of the stone could finally speak. The mother and child weren't his invention. They were a truth the stone had held in its heart for eons, waiting for someone with enough patience and humility to come along and set them free. And so the work continued, tap by tap, millimeter by millimeter. A slow and beautiful conversation between a man and a stone under the vast African sky. As the months wore on, the initial rugged work of removing large chunks of stone gave way to something far more intimate. The relationship between Tao and the granite deepened, transforming from a one-sided imposition of will into a true back-and-forth dialogue. The broad, general form he had first envisioned was now clearly defined. You could see the mother's back, humped protectively over her child. You could see the child's small, rounded form nestled securely against her. Their heads were inclined towards each other, appearing almost as a single, unified mass of love and connection. The raw power of the initial carving was softening into a story. Now came the phase of refinement, the phase of conversation in finer and finer detail. This was where the stone truly began to speak its mind, to have its own say in its final form. Tao might have a precise plan in his head. For instance, he might decide to carve a deeply undercut space between the mother's arm and her body. Creating a sense of separation and air, he would begin the work, his copper chisel tapping away, peeling back the layers. But, as he worked, the stone would reveal a secret. Perhaps a hidden crystalline knot, a place within the granite that was unusually tough, a dense cluster of minerals that resisted the chisel's bite. To force his way through this knot would be a monumental effort. It could take weeks of painstaking work with his soft copper tools, and worse, it would risk creating a fissure, a crack that could compromise the entire sculpture. In these moments, a less experienced carver might curse his luck and press on, determined to bend the stone to his will. But Tao was not just a carver, he was a listener. He would pause, set down his tools, and run his hand over the stubborn area. He would feel its density, its unyielding nature. He understood what the stone was telling him. It was saying, "Do not open this space so wide. Do not force this separation. Keep it closer, more intimate. Let us remain connected here." And so, he would listen. He would adjust his plan, leaving more of the stone in that space than he had originally intended. The result, the figures of the mother and child felt even more densely connected, their embrace more solid, more protective. The supposed flaw, the stubborn knot of crystal, became a key feature. It hadn't ruined the sculpture. It had improved it, adding a depth and meaning that Tao's original plan had lacked. The stone had guided him to a better truth. This dialogue wasn't always about resistance. Sometimes, the stone would offer an unexpected gift, a moment of pure serendipity. Imagine Tao working on the delicate features of the child's face. The form is emerging, the curve of the cheek, the hint of a nose. As he carefully chips away, a tiny, perfect crystal of clear quartz might suddenly emerge, precisely where an eye should be. It's a moment that would make him catch his breath. Instead of chipping it away to create a uniform surface, he would recognize it for the miracle it was. He would switch to his finest, most delicate tools and work around it with infinite care, leaving the crystal just slightly proud of the surrounding surface. He knew that later, when the time came for polishing, this single point of quartz would catch the light in a unique way. It would seem to glint with an inner life, a spark of awareness. It was a detail he could never have planned, a serendipitous touch that felt utterly destined, as if the stone itself had chosen to give the child a soul. Each day, the pile of granite dust on the workshop floor grew. To an outsider, it might look like waste, the discarded remnants of the process. But to Tao, that dust was a physical record of their long conversation. It was not waste at all. It was the manifestation of all the questions he had asked the stone with his chisel, and all the answers the stone had given him. It was the physical form of all the unnecessary parts, all the possibilities that were considered and then gently let go to reveal the essential truth within. Every single grain of that dust had once been part of the stone's body, holding the figures of the mother and child captive inside. Now, released from that duty, the dust would return to the earth, its purpose in the great conversation fulfilled. It was the story of their collaboration, written in powder. After nearly a year of this patient, daily dialogue, the primary carving phase was complete. The figures were fully realized. The mother and child were no longer a vague shape, but two distinct beings. Their forms, their posture, their relationship, all clearly expressed. Yet, the sculpture was not finished. The surface was still a textured landscape of tiny chisel marks, a fine-grained pattern that crisscrossed every curve and plane. This wasn't a flaw to be erased. It was the skin of their dialogue, the visible history of every tap, every decision, every compromise made over the long months. It was a testament to the process itself. The next phase would be one of transformation. It would involve smoothing, then polishing. This was a different kind of touch, a caress rather than a cut. Using finer and finer stones, water, and immense patience, Tao would begin to rub down the chiseled surface. This process would slowly awaken the stone's inner light, bringing out the deep, complex colors and the crystalline structure of the granite that had been hidden for so long. The rough texture would give way to a surface as smooth as water, one that invited the hand to touch and the light to play. But the essential work, the most important part of the journey, was already done. The listening, the responding, the collaborative act of revelation that was the heart of the creation, the silent form that had slept within the block of granite for eons, for millennia, was now awake in the world. It stood not just as a sculpture of a mother and child, but as a testament to a year-long conversation. A story told in the universal language of tap, pause, and the patient, listening hands of a master who knew that true creation is not about commanding, but about cooperating. Our journey through the artistic soul of Zimbabwe now takes a fascinating turn. We leave behind the unyielding, patient granite of the hills, the stone that demands strength and endurance, and we move towards a material that is softer, warmer, and altogether different. We're talking about a symbol that has become synonymous with the very spirit of this ancient land, the soapstone bird. To understand this icon, we must travel to its birthplace, the magnificent ruins of Great Zimbabwe. This is the stone city that gave the nation its name, a place of silent grandeur and profound history. Imagine standing here, surrounded by towering dry stone walls that rise towards the African sky, walking through labyrinthine passages and gazing up at the enigmatic conical towers. It was here, between the 11th and 15th centuries, that a powerful and sophisticated civilization flourished. And within these very walls, a unique form of sculpture was born. The material they chose was not the hard granite of the surrounding landscape. Instead, the carvers of Great Zimbabwe turned to steatite, more commonly known as soapstone. This is a talcrich rock, and its properties are key to its artistic purpose. It's soft, so soft you can scratch it with a fingernail. It holds a subtle warmth when you touch it, feeling almost alive. Its color palette is beautiful, ranging from a pale, almost luminous gray to a deep, rich, greenish black, often with delicate veining running through it. This stone was the perfect medium for a different kind of spiritual expression. One that was intimate, symbolic, and deeply connected to the inner world of the Shona people. From this remarkable stone, the carvers created the legendary Zimbabwe birds. 8 of these sculptures were discovered in the ruins, although it's highly probable that many more once existed. Standing here today, it's easy to imagine them perched high above the city, silent guardians watching over the kingdom. When you look at one of these birds, the first thing you notice is that they are not meant to be a realistic, photographic representation of a bird. These are not simple nature carvings. They are stylized, symbolic figures, most likely representing powerful raptors, like the fish eagle or the battler. Eagle birds that command the sky and hold immense symbolic weight in Shona cosmology. The fish eagle, with its piercing cry, is seen as a messenger between the heavens and the earth. The battler, with its acrobatic flight, is a symbol of good fortune and protection. The sculptures themselves are a masterclass in elegant simplification. Each bird stands about 1.5 feet tall, and they were originally mounted on top of 3-foot-tall stone monoliths or columns, placing them high above the people, connecting them to the sky. Let's look closely at the form. The beak is powerful and curved, a statement of strength and authority. The neck is strong and thick, supporting a proud head that gazes out with an eternal watchfulness. The feathers are not individually carved, but are suggested by beautiful, geometric chevron patterns, a stylistic choice that adds to their iconic look. But perhaps the most striking feature is the body. The torso is not sculpted with anatomical detail. It's a solid, vertical column. The wings are folded flat against this column, their edges not sharply defined. To a modern eye, especially one conditioned by the detailed naturalism of Greco-Roman art, these sculptures might seem unfinished or primitive. The eyes are often just shallow depressions, not deeply carved sockets. The talons might blend into the perch, but this is where we must shift our perspective. To the Shona carvers of the 13th and 14th centuries, and to their spiritual descendants today, this was not a lack of skill. It was a profound philosophical and spiritual choice. The abstraction was deliberate. You see, these birds were not just decorative objects or trophies. They were far more. They were powerful emblems known as enduro, symbols of royal authority and, crucially, spiritual mediation. Their purpose was to connect the earthly king, the Mambo, to the world beyond. They were a bridge between the living and the ancestors, the Vadzamu, and ultimately to the supreme creator god, Mori. They served as guardians for the city, messengers to the spirit world, and vessels for spiritual energy. And this idea of a vessel is key to understanding their form. For a vessel to be functional, it must have an opening. It cannot be a completely sealed, finished object. The unfinished quality of the birds, the lack of complete detail, was intentional. It left them open to receive messages from the spirits, open to channel divine energy, open to hold the sacred power they were meant to embody. The simplified form wasn't a failure of realism. It was a success of symbolism. It created a space for the sacred to enter. Think about it this way. A photograph of a bird shows you what a bird asterisk looks asterisk like. The Zimbabwe bird tells you what a bird asterisk means asterisk. It captures the essence, the spirit, the power of the eagle, not just its physical appearance. This is a concept that resonates deeply in many African artistic traditions. The idea that art is not for mere observation, but for interaction, for spiritual function. The placement of the birds within the great enclosure of the ruins is also significant. Most were found in the hill complex, the sacred ritual center of the city, believed to be the residence of the king and the spiritual leaders. Placed on their tall monoliths, they would have stood along the walls, silhouetted against the sky. They would have been the last thing people saw as they looked up towards the heavens and the first thing to catch the morning light. They physically and symbolically occupied the space between earth and sky, reinforcing their role as messengers. The chevron pattern on the birds is another layer of symbolism. This pattern is found throughout the ruins, decorating the walls themselves. It's believed to represent fertility, new life, and the lineage of the dynasty. By carving this pattern onto the birds, the artists were linking the royal power, the spiritual world, and the very continuity of the Shona people into one unified, powerful symbol. The bird wasn't just a messenger. It was an emblem of the entire cosmic and social order. When colonial explorers and treasure hunters first stumbled upon these ruins and these birds in the late 19th century, they couldn't comprehend their origin. They refused to believe that indigenous Africans could have created such a sophisticated city and such profound art. They concocted elaborate racist theories, attributing the city to everyone from ancient Phoenicians to the Queen of Sheba. The birds were looted, taken from their home, and scattered across the world, with most ending up in the museums of Cecil Rhodes in South Africa. The story of their repatriation is a powerful chapter in Zimbabwe's history. After the country gained its independence in 1980, the new nation took its name from these very ruins in Zimbabwe, meaning House of Stone. The Zimbabwe bird was placed on the national flag, the currency, and the coat of arms. It became the ultimate symbol of national identity, sovereignty, and a reclaimed history. The country then began a long and arduous process of campaigning for the return of its stolen artifacts. One by one, the birds have been coming home. Their return is not just the return of a piece of stone. It's the return of a piece of the nation's soul. It's a restoration of cultural heritage and a powerful act of post-colonial healing. Today, you can see 7 of the 8 original birds in Zimbabwe, with most housed in a small museum at the Great Zimbabwe site itself. Seeing them there, back in the landscape from which they were born, is an incredibly moving experience. You can feel the weight of history, the spiritual power that still emanates from them. The legacy of these carvers lives on. Contemporary Zimbabwean sculptors, particularly those working in soapstone, continue to draw inspiration from these ancient masters. They understand that carving is not just about shaping stone, but about releasing the spirit within it. They embrace the power of suggestion over literal depiction, and the importance of leaving a piece open to interpretation and spiritual connection. The Zimbabwe bird is not a relic of a dead past. It is a living symbol, a testament to the enduring power of art to connect us to our history, our spirituality, and our identity. It stands proud, a messenger from the ancestors, still speaking to us across the centuries. Now imagine sitting not in a museum, but with a master carver, a Tao, someone whose hands and soul are connected to the stone. He's not carving right now, he's teaching. In his weathered hands, he holds a smaller, modern replica of one of those famous birds. His thumb gently strokes the edge of a wing, an area that seems intentionally rough, almost unfinished. His voice is low, measured, filled with the wisdom of generations. When you finish a thing completely, he says, looking at you, not just the stone, you close it. You say, this is it. It is done. There is no more. You put a wall around its spirit. He pauses, letting the weight of those words settle. Then he taps the bird's solid stone torso. The sound is a dull, earthy thud. This stone, he continues, is a house. But a house is useless if it has no door. If you carve every feather perfect, polish every curve to a mirror shine, you make a beautiful house with no windows, no doorway. The spirit cannot get in, and if it cannot get in, it cannot get out. It becomes a tomb. A tomb. That single word transforms everything. What we might see as a flaw, an imperfection, or a lack of skill is, in fact, the most crucial part of the entire creation. This is the heart of the philosophy, a concept known as the Masuatha spirit door, that incomplete wing, the eye that is merely suggested rather than fully defined, the patch of rough texture left on an otherwise smooth surface. These are not mistakes. They are openings. They are deliberate, conscious invitations. By not defining the form absolutely, the carver leaves space. Space for what? Space for interpretation, for imagination, for movement, for breath. Most importantly, the carver leaves room for the Shavi, the ancestral or totemic spirit, to enter the stone and animate it. The physical object is just a vessel. The true art lies in making that vessel receptive. Think about that for a moment. The bird sculpture was never meant to be a static, photorealistic representation of a fish eagle. That wasn't the goal. Its purpose was far more profound. It was created to be a host, a home for the spirit of the eagle itself, or for the spirit of the king, whose power and connection to the divine realm the eagle symbolized. A fully finished, perfectly polished bird would be, in the eyes of its creator, a dead bird. It would be a mere image, a beautiful but lifeless shell. A bird with a masuo, a spirit door, was a living potential. It existed in a state of perpetual becoming. It was always partly in this world of stone and matter, and partly in the spirit world, the world of energy and ancestors. This duality is precisely what allowed it to act as a messenger, a conduit between the earthly king and the heavens. This wasn't just about the birds, either. This philosophy of the spirit door permeates much of traditional Shona sculpture. You might see a human face, carved with incredible detail and lifelike expression. But if you turn it around, the back of the head is left as a raw, unworked block of stone. A figure might have one arm polished smooth, every muscle defined, while the other arm seems to melt back into the rough stone from which it came. This isn't laziness or an unfinished project. It's a visual language, a powerful statement being made through form and texture. It says, I am here, but I am also elsewhere. I am defined, but I am also free. I am of the earth, but I am open to the sky. This balance between the defined and the undefined, the finished and the unfinished, is a reflection of a worldview where the physical and spiritual are not separate but deeply intertwined. The sculpture is a bridge, and for a bridge to work, it must touch both sides of the ravine. The modern Western eye is often trained to look for perfection, for symmetry, for a complete and total finish. We want our art to be a closed statement, a definitive object. But this ancient Shona philosophy challenges that entire notion. It suggests that true beauty, true life, lies in the potential, in the space left open. It's in the suggestion, not just the statement. The carver doesn't tell you everything. He invites you and the spirit to participate in the act of creation. The sculpture is only truly complete when a viewer's imagination or a spirit's presence fills in the gaps. Let's delve deeper into the materials themselves. The sculptors worked with soapstone, serpentine, and other local stones. These are not inert, dead materials in the Shona worldview. Stone has a life, a presence. The carver's job is not to impose his will upon the stone, but to listen to it, to find the form that already exists within. The master carver is in a dialogue with the material. He might see a vein in the rock and know that this will be the curve of a back. He might feel a certain density and understand that this is where the heart of the creature lies. The act of carving is one of revealing, not just creating. The musuo, the spirit door, is the ultimate respect for the stone's own spirit. By leaving a part of it rough and uncuffed, the artist acknowledges the stone's origin, its connection to the earth, to the mountain it came from. It's a signature of humility. The artist is saying, I have revealed this form, but I have not conquered the stone. I have collaborated with it. This partnership between artist and material is fundamental. The finished piece is a testament not just to the artist's skill, but to the life inherent in the rock itself. This concept also speaks volumes about the community's relationship with art. In many cultures, art is something to be placed on a pedestal, admired from a distance, and not touched. But the Shona sculptures, with their spirit doors, invite interaction. They are not just objects of sight, but of spirit. They had a function. They were active participants in the spiritual life of the community at Great Zimbabwe. They weren't just decorations. They were tools for communication with the divine. They were anchors for spiritual power. When you see a piece of modern Shona sculpture today, and it's a vibrant, living tradition, look for the musuo, look for that patch of rough skin on a polished elephant, or the way a strand of hair merges back into raw stone. You'll see it everywhere once you know what to look for. And when you see it, you'll understand that you are not just looking at an object of beauty, but at a house with an open door, an invitation to a world beyond what is immediately visible. This philosophy teaches us a valuable lesson that extends far beyond art. In our own lives, how often do we strive for a perfect, polished finish? We want to have everything figured out, every detail planned, every box checked. We try to create a life that is a beautiful house, with no windows and no doors. We might fear incompleteness, seeing it as failure. But perhaps, like the Shona carvers, we need to learn the wisdom of leaving a space open, leaving room for the unexpected, for change, for spirit. Maybe the most alive parts of our lives are the ones that aren't perfectly defined, the areas where we are still becoming, still open to the sky. The Musuo is a reminder that a perfect, closed system is a tomb. A life with an open door is a life of infinite potential. It's a profound shift in perspective. To see the unfinished as the very source of life and connection. The great Zimbabwe birds were not just symbols of power, they were functioning spiritual technology. And the key to that technology was the humble, brilliant, and deeply philosophical concept of the spirit door. Have you ever looked at a piece of ancient art and felt like there was more to it than meets the eye? A story left untold, a purpose hidden just beneath the surface. Today, we're traveling back in time to the heart of a powerful African kingdom to uncover a secret held within stone. We go in to explore the magnificent city of Great Zimbabwe and its enigmatic guardians, the soapstone birds. These aren't just beautiful sculptures. They are keys to understanding a profound philosophy of power, spirit, and the art of leaving things beautifully, purposefully, incomplete. Imagine a city of immense stone walls, built without any mortar, rising from the savanna of southern Africa. This was Great Zimbabwe, the capital of a vast empire that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries. At its peak, it was a bustling hub of trade, religion, and royal power. Gold from its mines reached as far as China, and its influence was felt across the continent. At the very top of this city, on a high granite hill known as the Acropolis, stood a series of tall monoliths. And perched atop these stone pillars were the silent sentinels, 8 masterfully carved soapstone birds. When we look at these birds today with our modern eyes, we see remarkable artifacts. They are stylized, powerful figures, combining avian features with human-like elements, such as lips and 5-toed feet instead of talons. They are serene, majestic, and undeniably ancient. But to the people of Great Zimbabwe, these were not static objects of art to be admired from a distance. They were living, breathing instruments of spiritual power, performing a sacred and vital function. They weren't just watching over the city. They were actively guarding it, and their power came from a very specific and perhaps surprising quality: their state of open potential. Let's take a closer look. If you examine the sculptures carefully, you'll notice they aren't fully finished. There are areas that seem rough-hewn, details that are suggested rather than explicitly carved. A wing's edge might feel undefined. An eye might be more of an impression than a detailed feature. A modern sculptor might see this as unfinished work, a project abandoned before completion. But the elders of Great Zimbabwe saw it differently. They saw a doorway. They believed that during the day, the birds were exactly as we see them, stone sentinels, physically present and watching over the kingdom. But this was only their dormant state. The true magic happened at night, when the sun set and the full moon rose, casting its ethereal glow over the stone enclosures. The world of the spirits drew closer. In this liminal time, the elders believed the Musuo, the spiritual essence or gateway within the stone, would activate. The very incompleteness of the sculptures was the channel through which this transformation occurred. Through those unfinished openings, the spirit within the bird would begin to fully form. The rough edge of a wing would complete itself, not in stone, but in spectral light. The suggested I would suddenly gain a piercing, all-seeing gaze. The static figure would stir, not with physical movement, but with an outpouring of spiritual energy. In the mystical light of the African moon, The soapstone sentinels would become fully realized spiritual eagles, their forms perfected by the unseen world, and then they would fly. Imagine it, high above the sleeping city, these spirit birds would leave their stone perches. They would take to the night skies, soaring on wings of moonlight, their spectral forms gliding silently over the kingdom. Their duty was multifaceted. They were the ultimate patrol, watching not for physical armies, but for spiritual danger's negative energies, malevolent forces, or ill wishes directed at the kingdom. They were celestial messengers, carrying the prayers and concerns of the people to the ancestors, and bringing back guidance and blessings. They were the ultimate guardians, ensuring the symbolic, spiritual, and physical security of the Mumbo, the king, and all his people. Their nightly vigil was a sacred dance between the physical and the spiritual, a constant reaffirmation of the connection between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. At the first hint of dawn, as the eastern sky began to pale, their mission would be complete. They would return to the Acropolis, one by one, folding their spirit wings back into the stone. The spectral light would recede, the piercing gaze would soften back into a suggestion, and the vibrant, living eagles of the night would once more become the still, silent sculptures of the day. Their nightly duty was done, their power contained once more within the soapstone, waiting for the next moonrise. Now, it's easy to dismiss this as mere folklore or childish fantasy, but to do so would be to miss the point entirely. This belief system wasn't about a literal, physical bird flying around. It was a deeply sophisticated understanding of the purpose of art and its relationship with the spiritual world. For the creators and the people of Great Zimbabwe, the sculpture itself was not the end product. The physical stone bird was merely the instrument, like a finely tuned drum or a sacred rattle. The true artwork, the real masterpiece, was the spiritual activity it facilitated, the protection it offered, the connection it forged with the ancestors, the communion it enabled between different realms of existence. The genius of the carver, then, was not found in their ability to perfectly finish every detail of the form. Their ultimate skill lay in knowing precisely where and how to leave it unfinished. It was about intuitively understanding how to craft the perfect doorway for power to flow in and out. The roughness, the lack of detail, the open spaces, these weren't mistakes. They were invitations. They were voids intentionally left for the sacred to fill. This is a concept that turns our Western ideas of art on their head. We often value perfection, polish, the artist's complete and total control over their medium. Here, the highest form of artistry was an act of letting go, of creating a partnership with the invisible. Let's just pause for a moment and really think about this. Picture yourself standing on that granite hill, under the same vast African sky, the same moon that once shone on those stone birds. To intentionally hold back, to resist the all-too-human urge to perfect, to polish, to sign your name on a finished masterpiece. To leave a work deliberately vulnerable, open, and incomplete. This is not an act of carelessness. It is a profound act of faith. It's faith that something greater than the artist's own hand will come to complete the work. It's faith that a divine or ancestral energy will inhabit the form, giving it a life and a purpose far beyond its physical existence. The guardians on the wall of Great Zimbabwe were powerful precisely because they were incomplete. Their strength lay not in their solid, finished form, but in their perpetual openness, in their eternal, silent invitation to the invisible world to come and be part of the story. This philosophy teaches us a powerful lesson that resonates even today. In our own lives, we often strive for perfection. We want to have the perfect career, the perfect family, the perfect plan. with every detail figured out. We resist uncertainty and fear the unknown. But the lesson of the soapstone birds is that there is incredible strength in openness. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to leave space for growth, for change, for the unexpected, for something greater than ourselves to enter our lives and complete the picture in ways we could never have imagined. Perhaps our own unfinished parts, our vulnerabilities, our questions, our unresolved journeys are not weaknesses, but doorways. They are the very spaces where magic can happen, where our own spirit can take flight. The story of the birds of Zimbabwe is a beautiful reminder that the most important things in life are often unseen. The artist's hand stops, but the art's life begins. It's a testament to a worldview where the physical and spiritual are not separate, but are in constant dialogue. Time, like a great river, flows onward, carrying us from one generation to the next. The world changes, yet some things remain. The Msasa tree, that silent witness to so much history, still stands tall. But the world beneath its branches is profoundly different. Tao, the old carver whose hands spoke with the stone, has passed on. His spirit has joined the ancestors, and his stories are now whispers on the wind. The workshop, once his sanctuary of creation, is now run by his grandson, Tendai. But the location, the very soul of the place, has moved. It is no longer that quiet space overlooking the rolling hills, a place of peace and contemplation. Today, it's a dusty plot, right by the main highway. The busy road that leads to the thundering spectacle of Victoria Falls. The gentle rhythms of nature have been replaced. The new background rhythm is the constant roar of heavy lorries and the impatient honking of tourist minibuses rushing past. Tendi's workshop is a simple shed, built from corrugated iron, starkly open on one side to the chaos of the road. Inside this shed, the scene is one of frantic, almost desperate production. This isn't the quiet dialogue between man and stone that his grandfather knew. This is a factory floor. Power tools whine and scream, their high-pitched cries dominating the air. An angle grinder, held firmly in Tender's hands, sends a brilliant shower of sparks flying as it violently shapes a block of soapstone. In just a few minutes, the rough outline of an elephant emerges, not born from patience, but forced into existence. Nearby, a drill fitted with a sanding attachment buffs a mother and child figure. The slow, meditative process of polishing by hand is gone. Now, a high, glossy shine is achieved in less than half an hour. The floor, the walls, everything is coated in a thick, pervasive layer of white stone dust. It gets into your clothes, your hair, the very air you breathe. The shelves are stacked high with finished products, not unique creations, but identical souvenirs. Rows of elephants, maps of Zimbabwe, and stylized figures, all waiting to be sold. Tendai works with a focused, almost tense expression etched on his face. His brow is furrowed in concentration, but it's the concentration of a factory worker meeting a deadline, not an artist lost in their craft. His orders come not from inspiration, but from the curio shop owners in the capital, Harare, and at the bustling Victoria Falls airport. The requirements they send are specific, rigid, and leave no room for artistic freedom. They dictate the size, the subject, and the finish. The iconic Zimbabwe bird is a perennial bestseller, but the instructions are clear. It must be small, cheap to produce, and perfectly, unnaturally smooth. It becomes a closed, dead thing, a caricature of its powerful symbolism. Tendai churns them out by the dozen, his movements efficient and practiced. Here, the stone is not a partner in creation. It is simply inventory, a raw material to be consumed. The stone no longer suggests forms or whispers its secrets to the carver. It is brutally forced into predetermined shapes. the ones that are proven to sell. The ancient dialogue between artist and medium has become a one-sided monologue of commercial demand. The stone's voice, its history and spirit, is completely drowned out by the scream of the grinder's blade and the imagined, incessant ringing of the cash register. There's no question that Tendai is a good man. He is a provider, a husband, a father. He works this hard to put food on the table, to pay the school fees for his children, to give them a life he hopes will be better than his own. His work is a sacrifice, a testament to his love for his family. But as he stands at the end of another long, grueling day, wiping the thick layer of white dust from his face, an undeniable feeling of emptiness settles in his chest, a hollow ache that the day's earnings can't quite fill. He looks at the dust on his hands. For his grandfather, this dust was the physical record of a conversation, the tangible evidence of a story told between man and stone. For Tendai, this dust feels different. It is just the waste product of a transaction, the soulless residue of commerce. The rhythm of the work is all wrong. His grandfather worked to the rhythm of a whisper, a gentle Gevantik. Tendai works to the rhythm of a shout, a constant, demanding roar that leaves him weary and unfulfilled. The spirit of the art feels lost, traded for survival in a world that values speed and profit above all else. And in the quiet moments, after the tools fall silent, he wonders what his grandfather would think of it all. In the farthest, darkest corner of the iron shed, far from the busy entrance where sunlight and curious eyes stream in, something sits hidden. It's covered by a faded blue cloth, a patch of quiet in a space usually buzzing with the sounds of commerce and creation. I rarely go near it. The tourists, with their cameras and their search for the perfect souvenir, never even know it exists. Their attention is drawn to the rows of polished elephants, the miniature hippos, the stylized human figures that are easy to understand, easy to pack, and easy to sell. They see the surface of my work, that part I show the world. But this corner, this cloth, holds something else entirely. When the day finally winds down, when the last customer has haggled their final price and walked away, and the heavy padlock clicks shut on the door, a different kind of quiet settles over the workshop. The dust motes dance in the last rays of light filtering through the corrugated iron, and the air cools. It's in these moments of solitude, when the demands of the day have faded, that I sometimes find my feet carrying me to that forgotten corner. It's an unconscious pull, a magnetic draw I don't try to fight. My hand reaches out, my fingers brushing against the worn, dusty fabric of the blue cloth. With a slow, almost reverent motion, I pull it away, and there it is. Revealed in the dim light is a piece of stone unlike any other in this entire workshop. It's a block of serpentine, but not the kind I usually work with. This one is a deep, forest green, so dark it's almost black in the shadows, but it's not monolithic. It's shot through with intricate veins of fiery red and deep, inky black, like lightning captured in the earth. The patterns swirl and twist, telling a story millions of years old. The stone is about the size of a large water jug, heavy and solid, anchored to the very ground it came from. This was Tao's last work, my grandfather's final conversation with the stone. He called it Moya Wigamo, Spirit of the Mountain. The name itself is a weight, a promise. And as you look at it, you begin to understand why. Only the very beginnings of a form have emerged from the raw block. You can see the suggestion of a human head, a broad, noble forehead, the strong, straight bridge of a nose. The rest is still raw, mountainous stone, its natural texture rough and untamed. But even in this nascent state, this unfinished whisper of a form, it is absolutely breathtaking. The stone doesn't just sit there. It feels alive. The form seems to be breathing just beneath the surface, waiting for the right hands to help it break free completely. It possesses a presence, an energy that fills this dark corner and pushes back against the encroaching shadows. Beside it, lying on a piece of old sackcloth, are the old tools. The Mukwa mallet, its wooden head darkened and smoothed by decades of use, and a set of copper chisels, their edges still keen despite the years of silence. They haven't been touched since he last put them down. Looking at them, I can almost hear the rhythmic tap-tap, the sound of a patient artist in dialogue with his medium. It's a sound that has grown faint in this workshop, replaced by the high-pitched whine and roar of my angle grinders and electric sanders. The contrast is stark. Here, in this quiet corner, is the soul of the craft. Out there, in the main part of the shed, is the business of survival. To me, this stone, this Moya Wigamo, is both a rebuke and a relic. It's a rebuke because, as I stand before it, I have to admit a hard truth. I don't have the skill to finish it. Or maybe that's not quite right. Perhaps I could learn the skill. But what I truly lack is the patience. The kind of patience my grandfather had. Finishing this piece the way he intended would require months, maybe even a year, of silent listening. It would mean showing up every day, not to impose my will on the stone, but to follow its lead. To let the spirit of the mountain reveal itself on its own terms. It's a slow, meditative process, a partnership, and I simply cannot afford that. I can't afford to spend months on a single sculpture that might not even sell. The tourists who come here want something quick, something they can recognize. They don't have the time or the inclination to understand a piece like this. My reality is a constant calculation of time versus money, of effort versus reward. I have rent to pay for this shed, materials to buy, a life to live. The romantic notion of the patient artist communing with his stone feels like a luxury from a bygone era, a story told about ancestors, but not a life that I can lead. So it's a relic, too. A relic of a relationship with the material that feels as distant and mythical to me now as the ancient stories of the flying soapstone birds of Great Zimbabwe. My grandfather didn't just see stone, he saw stories, he saw spirits, he saw ancestors. He believed that the sculptor's job was not to create something new, but to release what was already there. I work with the same stone, but my relationship with it is different. It's more practical, more transactional. I see a block of raw material, and I think about what I can turn it into most efficiently to meet the market's demand. I see potential profit, not a trapped soul. That's why I can't bring myself to sell it as it is. It would feel like a betrayal, like selling a sacred, unfinished prayer. And I certainly can't bring myself to finish it with my power tools. The thought alone feels like a sacrilege. To take an angle grinder to this surface, to force it into a shape with brute, screaming force, would be to shatter the delicate conversation my grandfather started. It would be a violation of his memory and of the stone itself. It would destroy the very essence of what makes this piece so special. So it sits, a monument to a suspended conversation, a ghost of the old way, haunting the machinery of the new. It's the heart of what we once were, hidden away in the belly of what we have become. Every time I look at it, I feel a pang of something I can only describe as shame, or maybe loss. In its unfinished face, in the suggestion of eyes that are not yet carved, I see my grandfather's eyes. I see them looking at me, not with anger or disappointment, but with a patient, questioning gaze. It's a look that asks, what have you become? What has our art become? And in that silent question, I feel the immense weight of a legacy of artistry, of spirit, of a deep connection to our land and our stories, passed down through generations. It's a legacy that's right here, in my hands, waiting. But I am too busy, too compromised by the realities of my life to pick it up. I am trapped between the past I revere and the future I must secure. So every night, after I've looked my fill, I gently, carefully place the faded blue cloth back over the stone. I cover the questioning eyes and the silent rebuke. I hide the spirit of the mountain away, promising myself that one day I will be worthy of it. But as I walk away and the darkness swallows it once more, I'm not sure if that's a promise I can ever keep. There are nights when the noise of the day simply refuses to leave Tender's head. The blare of truck horns, the endless haggling of tourists, the relentless shriek of the power grinder, it all replays in an exhausting loop, making sleep impossible. On these nights, when the world is finally quiet but his mind is not, he returns to the workshop alone. He doesn't flip the switch for the bright, harsh fluorescent lights. Instead, he lights a single paraffin lamp. Its flame casts a warm, trembling circle of light in the vast, dark shed. The familiar shelves of grinning elephant souvenirs and glossy, tourist-trap maps transform into sinister, silent spectators in the dancing shadows. Tonight, he bypasses his usual workbench, the one cluttered with half-finished giraffes and keyboards. He goes to a spot on the packed earth floor near the large, shrouded figure that looms in the corner, his grandfather's unfinished masterpiece. From a worn wooden chest, he carefully takes out his grandfather's tools. The old Makwa mallet feels foreign in his hand, its weight both a comforting memory and a strange burden. He selects a small, rough piece of granite, one he found in the hills months ago. It was a piece that had seemed to call to him in a rare moment of quiet, a secret he has kept hidden ever since. He sits cross-legged on the cool earth, the lamplight pooling around him. He places the copper chisel against the stone. He breathes deeply, trying to empty his mind. He tries to listen, but the silence is deafening, and it's the wrong kind of silence. It's an empty void, haunted by the ghost echoes of the day's cacophony. He brings the mallet down. Thump. The sound is loud, jarring in the empty space. It feels clumsy, aggressive, entirely wrong. He tries again. Tap, tap. The rhythm is jagged, impatient. His mind is already elsewhere, on an unpaid bill for the workshop, on a large souvenir order that's due next week. The pressures of the New World crowd in frustration boils over. He stops, setting the tools down with a sigh that feels heavy in his chest. He places both palms flat on the cool granite, closing his eyes, just as he had seen his grandfather do 1,000 times. He tries to feel. For a long, long time, there is nothing. Just the hard, unyielding fact of the stone beneath his hands. Then, slowly, a memory surfaces. Not from the stone, but from deep within himself. The memory of his grandfather's hands, gnarled and wise, moving over rock like a blind man reading a beloved face. The memory of a rhythm that was not just sound, but a heartbeat. A conversation. He picks up the tools again. This time, his breath deepens, settles. He consciously pushes the bill, the order, the noise, to the very edges of his mind, holding them at bay. He taps. A tiny flake of granite falls away. He runs his thumb over the new surface. It's smooth. He taps again, adjusting the angle of the chisel by a hair's breadth. Another flake falls. A rhythm begins to form, hesitant at first, then steadier. Tap, 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 a pause. He feels the stone. Tap, for a few precious minutes, the outside world falls away completely. There is only the circle of lamplight, the feel of the aged wood and cool copper in his hands, and the granular, solid reality of the stone. He feels, or maybe just imagines he feels, a suggestion, a subtle curve, a direction the stone wants to go. It is faint, like a whisper carried on a windstorm, but it is there. He is close. Then, A heavy truck rumbles by on the highway outside. Its headlights sweep through the cracks in the shed's walls, a blade of cold light that slices through the dark. The spell is broken. The whisper is gone. The stone is just a stone again, inert and silent. Tendai carefully puts the tools away, a profound sadness coloring his movements. The dilemma that haunts him is not solved, but in those few minutes of fragile connection, he understood it with a new, painful clarity. The challenge isn't about choosing between the old way and the new, between art and commerce. It's about whether he can carve out enough inner space, enough true quiet, to hear the stones whisper over the world's relentless shout. The shrouded masterpiece in the corner is no longer just his grandfather's legacy, it is now his own. It stands as a symbol of the conversation he yearns to have but cannot yet sustain. A silence he is learning painstakingly to hear once again. And in that struggle, in that lonely workshop, lies the heart of his journey. The lamp is out. The workshop is dark. Here, under the immense, star-scattered sky of Zimbabwe, the hills that hold the granite sleep and the ruins of great Zimbabwe stand in moonlit silence. The story of the sculptors of silence is complete, but its echo lingers. A quiet vibration in the spaces between the stars and the stone. We began our journey with hands on rock, learning a fundamental truth, that true creation starts not with making, but with listening. It begins with the humble, patient art of hearing a stone's intent. We felt the whisper of wooden mallets and soft copper, tools designed for a conversation, not for conquest. We saw the profound wisdom captured in the unfinished soapstone bird, where an open wing was not a sign of incompletion, but a deliberate invitation for spirit to enter and leave as it pleased. And we felt the modern ache of Tendai, his brow furrowed as he strained to hear those old, ancestral whispers in a world filled with so much new noise. The legacy of these masters is not a particular style, nor is it a set of objects to be admired behind glass in a museum. It is a philosophy. It is the deep, resonant understanding that the world is full of voices and not just human ones. It is the voice of the rock, the voice of the wind, the voice of the ancestral memory that lives and breathes in the land itself. Their art was never an act of imposition. It was an act of deep, attentive listening, a respectful dialogue with the very substance of the earth. They worked with the gentle humility of midwives, simply assisting at the birth of forms that were already present, waiting patiently within the heart of stone. In our own lives, so often clamorous with demands, deadlines, and digital distractions, their example shines like a gentle beacon. It poses a question to each of us. What are we not hearing simply because we are too busy making noise? What beautiful, essential forms sleep within the rough, uncut stone of our days, just waiting for a moment of quiet attention to be revealed? The sculptors of silence teach us a powerful lesson, that the most transformative acts are often the quietest ones. A hand placed in respect, a tool used with care, a work left deliberately open to a meaning far greater than itself. So, as we take our leave of these hills of stone and spirit, I invite you to carry this quiet with you. Let it settle into the silence between your thoughts. Find a home in the space between your breaths. Remember the sculptors who did not shout, but who listened. And know that sometimes the most beautiful and profound thing we can create is not another object to fill the world, but the deep, receptive silence that allows the world, in its own time and in its own weight, to finally speak. You are now under baobab skies. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If these stories have moved you, please consider subscribing, so we can continue to explore the quiet wonders of our world together.